Hey everyone, this is James from TDB bringing you another In-Betweenisode. Today we will be drinking some tea. We're going to be having some Heicha here, but wanted to introduce this episode first. It's going to be covering a Tianjian, an Anhua Tianjian. That's a form of dark tea. This is not the infamous Fuzhuan that also comes from Hunan, but a Tianjian, so it's a different sort of tea. I actually ordered both samplers from Yunnan Sourcing. And it's a good example of kind of like the fun little offerings that we have access to that, we probably wouldn't have. There's a lot of different types of dark tea, most of which I don't know that much about. I've learned about them a little bit throughout the years, but I haven't really done focused learning on any of them, so I wouldn't say my knowledge is particularly deep or anything. But yeah, I was curious. I have liked some Tianjian in the past. White Tutui had a very smoky one that I ended up with two of. I think someone found it so smoky they gave it to me. And even though I don't drink that type of tea normally, I do. It's kind of an interesting one to keep around. So I have that lying outside of my humidor because I don't want everything to smoke it up. Curious to certainly try these teas. I have actually sampled through all 5 of them already. And there are definitely a couple favorites. I'd say I liked about half of them. I would say the batting average is perhaps even a little higher than something like the Fuzhuan, where I really gotta add a lot of leaf to make it kind of worth my while. Unsurprisingly, I like the oldest two the most, so I'm going to be bringing on my favorite, the one that stood out the most during the sampling, and that is the 2009 Gaojiashan. So that's about 15 years old now. It's interesting. These teas definitely stand out a little bit where they're not exactly like pu'er, but they are sort of pu'er adjacent. And it's not as easy to understand. Like Lubao is the easiest Heicha for me to understand besides pu'er, just because it fits very, very neatly and closely and maps on to something like a ripe tea. Whereas these ones, as well as the Fuzhuans, are a little bit harder to map. So Scott has a lot of different info on those teas. Definitely check out his site and check out kind of what they're selling. And yeah, it's a fun one. If you have like $40 to spare, a nice way to just kind of sample a couple different teas. All right, so here I am. I am starting on steep number 3 and 4. I had a couple earlier today. Couldn't wait. So this is an interesting tea. Scott has a lot of good info on here about this type of tea. It's usually a spring harvest tea. I think made out of specific material from Anhua. I would assume this is the small leaf material because that is generally the standard once we get outside of Yunnan. Very aromatic. You could smell that this tea probably used to be smoky. He also talks interestingly and says that kind of when the tea gets above 10 years, it tends to get very mellow. It's interesting because I did like the teas that were above 10 years old too. Perhaps it speaks more to my taste preference too. I'm curious how other people find it, if they generally agree that they like the older ones or if they're kind of okay with them. There was a couple around 2021, and then I think there was one kind of mid-age there. And I just preferred the 2009 and 2011 by a bit. I don't know. I like the darker, more mellow taste just in general. So I'm curious if my experience lines up with other people, especially if you've done like kind of the same sampler. Cheers. Got a nice body. Push this one a little bit. And I'd say these kind of, there's kind of like this nice bamboo-ness to this too. I'd say it kind of straddles that line between pu'er and oolong. I'd say it's probably a little woodier than you're generally going to get from oolong. The younger ones definitely had some interesting fresh tastes going on. I just couldn't say that they were necessarily to my taste. Sort of like pu'er, the tea does seem to get darker as it ages, perhaps not surprisingly. Just a nice balance of kind of sweetness. Bamboo, wood, definitely not as dark or as heavy as a pu'er, but it still has kind of enough thickness. We'll see how this 4th steep is and potentially push this 5th steep just a little bit. I think pu'er generally has higher longevity than a lot of the other heichas, maybe because of the varietal. I'm not totally sure on that account. Cheers. But especially if you're working with kind of like looser, tippy material. And this tea, I checked the price beforehand. It's something like $180 for like a kilogram. So really not that expensive when you kind of buy it in those sorts of quantities. Of course, you can buy smaller quantities too. That'd be totally fine. It's nice. It's refreshing. It's just like kind of at a nice place right now. I don't know how this would age further. To Scott's point, it doesn't have kind of that big, strong, burly base that a lot of pu'er that we're used to saying will age well in the long term. So I'm not sure. That's a good question. I do have some Tianjian that I bought, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and I've just kind of set it aside. So yeah, curious how that is. Perhaps I should try those very smoky ones from White Tea at some point. I think those were probably 2014, 2015. Curious if anyone remembers those, the really smoke bomb tea that kind of circulated around. It was kind of infamous for a nice little stretch there in the tea community, probably, 8 or 9 years ago. It was an early White tea club thing. So yeah, letting this go for just a little bit longer. No fruit, anything like that. I'd say, for me at least, it hints at some kind of past floralness. Probably was definitely some smoke earlier in this too. But the tea presents itself in a pretty nice, consistent manner. There is a 2012 version of this that's also for sale that is probably worth some consideration. I haven't tried that one, so I'm not totally sure how it stacks up. Yeah, it's like, you could tell the production's pretty good. It's not super chopped up material or anything like that. And it's definitely losing quite a bit of steam as far as the aroma goes, but taste-wise, it's still holding up pretty okay. Cheers. Yeah, sprucing back up just a bit, and it has like just a nice woodiness to it. I would say that's kind of it. I'm not finding like a ton of crazy notes in this at all. Maybe a little bit of floral notes that were probably a little more prominent when the tea was a little bit younger. But for me, at least, this is just like a nice combination of body, oiliness, woody, and, nothing crazy as far as flavor notes go. In fact, I would say this is probably like a pretty accessible sort of tea that you can present to different people, probably pass the mom test even. I'll have to ask Denny on that if we bring this on to a show. I do plan to bring at least one Tianjian on to a normal episode as well. And it's just very refreshing and something that I am happy to drink. So I'm going to continue to drink this tea throughout the day. I'd say it's pretty solid. It has like, oh yeah, that's one thing. Texturally, it does have a little bit of interesting things going on. Resin, some minerals, stuff like that happening. The aftertaste is not, I would say, super deep, but it's okay. So yeah, just overall a pretty decent tea. So thank you from Scott. I highly recommend people check out kind of like these different samplers that he does. It's a great way to kind of explore tea. When he originally did those, it was like sort of like, I've already explored Yiwu tea and things like that. But now getting into sort of the different heichas and stuff like that, these are the sorts of samplers that I would seek out just because they're kind of fun and interesting to try. So thank you all for tuning in. I'll see you all next time. Cheers.